In addition to communicating identity choices, costumes also convey modernity and morality. We're going to look at 4 pictures of this actress called Kareena Kapoor from one particular film. And in this film, her character develops through her life, actually, and she goes from wearing very revealing clothing, as you see in that picture and in this picture, to this very Indian looking, very traditionally Indian looking person. And as we are looking through this particular characterization that is happening, what we are also seeing is it is not just her sartorial choices, her clothing that is changing. It is also her entire character that changes through these pieces of these clothes, right? So when she is introduced in the film, she's introduced as a little girl, and she's introduced in India. You're actually going to watch this film at a later point in the semester, but I want to talk about this particular character a little bit more. She's introduced as a little girl, and then when she grows up, we see her in England, and we see her in that particular dress. And this is her first introduction in the film. She comes out, so she's in her bedroom getting dressed, and when she comes out, she's looking like that. And as she kind of becomes more of a family person, her interaction with her clothing starts to change. She starts wearing very Indian clothes, and she starts wearing these sort of things. She starts wearing makeup that's very Indian. She starts wearing jewelry that's very Indian, and her entire persona, her entire character throughout the film changes, and that change is very deeply communicated through her clothing. This is actually a very fundamental thing that is happening in Bollywood, it's happening in film. In this particular character, in Kareena Kapoor's character she plays Pooja in this film. But about 40 years ago, 30 to 40 years ago, women's choices in clothing when they were not married to when they were married were very, very different. They could wear a variety of different things before they were married, and once they could only wear saris. In a lot of contexts, obviously everything depends on class and caste and where you are and who you are, all of that. But clothing choices were not that broad for women who were married because of reasons of modesty and morality and modernity and all of those. So if you remember, we talked about in week 2, who is looking at whom? Is Bollywood looking at us, or are we looking at Bollywood? And this is a very good example of how what is available to people in terms of when they're young versus when they grow is represented in their clothing choices in this particular film and a lot of other films. So a young Kareena Kapoor in this particular film is wearing a very Western, very revealing clothing, and an older Kareena Kapoor is wearing very Indian, very, very modest clothing, signifying not just her change of age, but also her growing up in senses of now she is grown up enough to be, and as the story progresses in this film, the daughter-in-law in a pretty rich, pretty respectable family. So things change about everything in her character. She also becomes more religious, but she also changes the way she's dressing. So as we move on from the Kareena Kapoor image, and we start talking about what other things costumes do. Costumes are outcomes of social practices and prevailing material and sartorial norms, right? So we actually choices that are made in Bollywood are influenced by choices that are made outside of Bollywood, but this is a two-way street. So there's a constant interaction between what is happening on screen in Bollywood and what is happening outside of Bollywood in terms of what general people, general populations are wearing. So I am sure if, for those of you who have been to India and for those of you who might go to India at some point, you will see how clothing stores very clearly represent and present what is happening in Bollywood. So if a song becomes very popular or if a particular style of clothing becomes very popular, you actually see it on the market. You see people selling it and you see people wearing it. That happens with colors, that happens with textures, kinds of embroidery, kinds of cuts, all of that. So it's very important for us to recognize that what is happening on screen in Bollywood is kind of also presented to us in other very material forms. And what is happening on screen, as we saw with the Kareena Kapoor example, is also a kind of representation of what happens in a person's life, how their morality changes, how their modernity, their conditions in their lived experience change, and that's all represented in clothing. The other thing that clothing does, and this is really significant for a country like India, which is very multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual, is clothing and representation creates certain forms, certain kinds of subjects. So historicity, tradition, values, they're all communicated through dress, and sometimes they're caricatured. So I want us to now look at a picture where there is, so you see two pictures here. The picture on top is of a very popular comedian in Hindi films, and comedian used to be a particular role that that was given to very big names who had significant roles in cinema, and they were doing a lot of different things. But these two stills are from a film called Padosan, meaning female neighbor. And you will see on top that Mahmood, the actor who you see here, is represented as having a mark on his forehead, 3 marks on his forehead, and then a dot. He's wearing not a shirt, he's wearing something else. He's wearing something very traditional. He does not have hair, so he has a very specific sort of hairstyle, right? And in this particular film, he was represented as a Southern Indian person. So if you know about India, you also know, or about the United States for that matter, we cannot put the entirety of a particular country or part of a country into a box, right? There's a lot of diversity within Southern United States. Similarly, there's a lot of diversity in Southern India. There is hundreds of languages that are spoken in Southern India. They are not just one big bunch that you can represent through one character. However, this film reduced this particular character to this particular look, right? And all of that was done just the way he looked, just the clothes he wore, and the way he talked. So we're going to talk more about representing people from other languages, people who speak other languages in India, other Indian languages in Bollywood cinema in I want to say week 14. But for now, let me just tell you that it's that his character, his Southern Indianness, is reduced to this particular dress, this particular hair, what he's doing on his head, marking his deep religious faith in Hinduism, and actually to some extent the color of his skin. So he's marked as a darker person than the protagonist of the film, who is here, and he played this very simple, very nice, innocent kind of guy who was after this female character, Saira Banu, who herself actually does exactly what Kareena Kapoor's character does in the film that we talked about a few moments ago. So her character grows through dress. Mahmood's character, though, the guy on top, his character is reduced to being a very stereotyped Southern Indian person, and the male protagonist's character kind of evolves into a more grounded, into a even nicer, smarter character as the film goes on. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is we see that identity is represented here, but we're also seeing that particular types of subjects are created, particular types of people, particular stereotypes are being created with the help of clothing. I want to show you one more example of another very popular film, which had Pran and Amitabh Bachchan. In this particular film, Amitabh Bachchan, the guy on my right, is a police officer. He's a young police officer, new in a city, new posting, and this film launched the career of Amitabh Bachchan, who is the biggest Bollywood star that there is. And he played alongside Pran, who was a lot more established than Amitabh Bachchan at that point. Pran's character, however, in this film is a Muslim guy who is a Pathan. The word Pathan comes with a lot of connotations. And look at the way he's dressed. In the entire film, he's dressed like that. So it is not as if everyone who is a Pathan in India is dressing like that, but the director felt the need to not just give that particular identification to Pran in the way he talked, in the way he carried himself, in his name, in his association to particular values, but also in his dress, right? And his dress is also separating him in religion, right? So Pathans, and especially the kind that Pran played, are always Muslim. So he played this particular character, wore particular kinds of dress to kind of signify not just his difference in terms of his ethnicity, but also in terms of his religion. So dress and sartorial choices are doing all of those things for us in Hindi cinema.